Good to have you with us on this Tuesday edition of Ed Schultz News and Commentary. The aftermath of the terrorist attack in Paris, of course, is still front and center on a global level. And the doubters are out and about. I remember the days, and I'm sure you do as well, that when we were in Iraq and Bush would hold these press conferences telling us, it's hard work, it's going to take time. And these infamous press conferences that Rumsfeld used to hold where he would interview himself. How long are we going to be there? I don't know. Is it hard work? Yes, it is. Where was all the patience back then for the Republicans? Well, they had plenty of it. We had to be in Iraq. We had to do this. In fact, we even had to do a surge and double down on everything. Was there a lot of opposition for months on end from the Democrats? In the waning years of Iraq, yes, there was. But early on, there was nothing but support for what Bush was doing and how he did it. And that's how we got hoodwinked as a country. We were lied into a war of choice. So where are we with the strategy right now as the critics are out and about saying that President Obama is the problem and he doesn't understand it? You know, I watched Fox News last night. I do about once every 2 months. I watched O'Reilly. If he's not a right-wing hack, if you think O'Reilly's fair and balanced, you need your head examined. It was one right-wing hack after another. You'd think Obama was the enemy of the country. So there are factions out there that just want to see political failure across every spectrum. Where are all these conservatives on gun violence in America? We have a terrorist attack, which is horrific in Paris. We've had gun violence in America. But, of course, that's not really important because we've got a Second Amendment. They can't have it both ways. We have to realize that there's terrorism all throughout the globe and all throughout our society. Whether we send troops into Syria or send them into Libya or send them into Egypt, it isn't going to matter. Protecting the homeland is what it is all about. And now the French have figured it out. And now they're going to go on the offensive and go after ISIS. So there's a lot of dynamics playing out here. What's the role of NATO? What is the global strategy? How close are we going to get to the Russians? It goes on and on. And it's not going to be some president coming in, waving a magic wand saying, well, we're going to take care of ISIS. And for Lindsey Graham and the rest of these right-wing nut jobs to think that if we make the same mistake all over again and commit hundreds upon thousands of troops into a certain country, that we're not going to be threatened again by terrorism, is a fool's errand. By the way, we don't have the money for any of that shit either. And by the way, the conservatives don't want to pay for it. They just want to gut the middle class a little bit further if we end up going down that road. And it's just amazing what it's evolving to. And I thought the president yesterday showed a tremendous amount of strength in his press conference. But let's talk about, for just a moment, where we are. This is Secretary of State John Kerry explaining that what ISIS has done is not the new norm.
No, this is not normal. It will not be normal. It will not become normal. This is an aberration, but it is a reflection of what foreign fighters have been able to do, going to Syria and then coming back and being able to spread their vile ideology to other people or even through the social media. But when the president says that ISIS, Daesh, better name for them, Daesh, is contained, he was talking about, and we are talking about, within Iraq and within Syria. Their territory has been reduced. They are now operating in 25% less territory.
So, Mr. Secretary, what if we put boots on the ground in Syria? What does that change?
We've always said there's also a threat of these attacks elsewhere in the world until we have gotten further down the road in this process, and that is a risk. Mm-hmm. But more troops on the ground are not suddenly going to, more, the invasion of the country or something, is not going to solve the problem, because you need something underneath it coming in that's going to secure those areas, that's going to show that the local population is invested in kicking out Daesh and helping to keep them out. And that's what we're working on right now.
So it's a question of containment. Is this strategy working to the point where we are containing ISIS? Are they becoming more fluid, a target-rich organization? That's the question for the American people, and what do we do about it? And ask yourself the question, are you ready to send your kids to Syria in hopes that other cities won't get hit? I don't think so. That's not where the American people are right now. Now, the discrepancy comes in on the word containment. This is the ranking member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, California Senator Dianne Feinstein.
I've never been more concerned. I read the intelligence faithfully. ISIL is not contained. ISIL is expanding. They've just put out a video saying it is their intent to attack this country. And I think we have to be prepared. There's only one way we're going to diminish them, and that is by taking them out, because they are growing. They are in more than a dozen countries now. They are sophisticated. They have apps to communicate on that cannot be pierced, even with a court order. So they have a kind of secret way of being able to conduct operations and operational planning. So we should take this very, very seriously.
So Senator Feinstein says we need to take them out. Okay, how do we do that? The conversation of strategy is going to be in the halls of Congress, no question about it. For more on that, let's go to Congressman John Garamendi of California. He sits on the House Armed Services Committee. Congressman, good to have you with us this morning.
Always, Ed.
Strategy, or is it working? How do we know if it's working? It's being, of course, put under the microscope pretty closely right now by the critics.
Well, certainly there are plenty of critics out there, but the reality is we've had a strategy for some time now, and it involves developing a coalition. A lot of the countries in the Middle East have to be involved. Rebuild Iraq. Turkey's involved. The Kurds are involved. We need to make sure that Saudi Arabia and Jordan, all of these countries have a common enemy, and it's called ISIL or ISIS. And that enemy can only be taken out by the local countries in that area determined to do it. We need to provide the support. We need to provide the necessary intelligence. Obviously, we're providing a lot of air power, all to the good. We don't need troops on the ground to do that. If we did that, as the president said, it would be a negative. It would probably make the situation worse, because now they would have the crusaders coming in once again into the Middle East.
How do you think the president did in his press conference yesterday at the G20?
Well, most people find it that he didn't do a good job. But he's also in a very unusual situation with 20 countries, many of whom he'd been negotiating with throughout the course of the day. And there are probably a lot of things that we don't know that went on. He was having a conversation with Putin. We don't know what came of that conversation. So he was certainly measured. And the result of that measurement, or being measured and being very careful in what he said, was people didn't see the strength that they seemed to want him to have presented.
And Congressman, he would have to go back to the Congress to get approval if there were to be 100 or 200,000 troops to be engaged anywhere, wouldn't he?
Well, he certainly have to get the money. This is one of the ongoing problems, is that Congress has not declared war. We have a constitutional obligation to declare war. I've been saying this for a year and a half, actually longer than that we need to engage as representatives of the American people in the conversation about what exactly is the strategy, how much money are we going to spend, how many troops are we going to put on the ground, all of those issues. That's called a declaration of war, now used as an authorization to use military force. We haven't done that. But the president has been very clear. He's actually asked Congress for a authorization to use military force, and it simply has died. The Republicans refuse to even debate the issue in the House of Representatives. So
on one hand, they're out criticizing the president's strategy. On the other hand, they're handcuffing him in the halls of Congress.
Exactly right.
Congressman John Garamendi, great to have you with us. I appreciate your time. Thank you, John.
You got it, Ed. Bye-bye.
You bet. This is Ed Schultz, News and Commentary. When we come back, what would troops on the ground do? Colonel Jack Jacobs will join us on that. And also Congresswoman Lois Frankel will join us. Do we bring in Syrian refugees? And if we do, how many? The president says it's the right thing to do. Stay with us. We're right back on Ed Schultz News and Commentary. Hey, folks, you've heard me talk about BioGreen Clean. I'm going to show you right now on my airplane just how tough this is. I want you to keep in mind, chemical-free, 100% plant-derived, biodegradable. It is the safest cleaner that you can get, and it's the most effective. Go to our website, wegoted.com, or go to biogreenclean.com. www.biogrenclean and order today. It's time to continue our conversation about mechanical insulation. Mechanical insulation is for the piping systems in our nation's commercial and industrial facilities. Facility owners are burning up billions of dollars through the lack of mechanical insulation on these piping systems. Call the iSave team. Insulation saves America valuable energy, and this team of energy conservation specialists is shovel-ready to save you money. Visit iSaveTeam.org to have a specialist give your plant an energy audit.
We perpetuate a culture of crime all the way from Wall Street right down to the main street in our hometowns. It's worse than it has been since FDR took control of the problem and said we can't count on industry taking care of the American labor. They probably have already engaged into some type of criminal cover-up, and the law prohibits the government from even doing anything about it.
Catch America's lawyer Mike Papantonio on YouTube at youtube.com/GoLeftTV.
Subscribe to the Ed Schultz podcast today. Simply log on to iTunes, search for Ed Schultz, and click the subscribe button to have the show delivered to your preferred listening device daily, free of charge. Rate and review the podcast to tell us how we're doing. More details at WeGotEd.com.
Good to have you back with us here on Ed Schultz News and Commentary. Well, President Bush had to defend his strategy for years in Iraq, so I guess we're in that phase of criticism for President Obama. But here's where we are as a country. The American people do not have the appetite or the will right now, or the money for that matter, to put boots on the ground at the measurable point of what the Republicans want to do right now in the Syrian civil war. So where are we? This strategy is what we are living with. For more on this, let's go to Colonel Jack Jacobs, MSNBC political analyst and military expert. Colonel, good to have you with us.
Good to be with you, Ed. Thanks for having me on the program.
You bet. What would more troops do if we were to inject troops into Syria? How do we know that would work?
Well, I think if you talk to military people who have some experience on the ground, they will probably tell you that at modest levels, it won't improve the situation at all. What you really need is a fairly substantial number of people. I'm talking about more than 100,000. And for a long period of time, if you listen to what Stanley McChrystal has said in the past, and he knows as much about this sort of stuff as anybody alive, he said at least a decade. So we're not doing that. I mean, we're not doing that. And in fact, you can make an argument. Let me preface everything by saying we need to get rid of these guys. ISIS. They're really bad news. They're apocalyptic. They want to kill everybody, including themselves. I mean, everybody. This is not just a stunt. These guys are not Al-Qaeda. These are very, very, very serious people who are driving toward the apocalypse. So something needs to be done about them, and soon. Having said that, you're absolutely right. The American people don't have the appetite for it. And as a matter of fact, the guys who really ought to be engaged here are precisely the people who are not engaged. That is, the countries in the region who have a great deal at stake if ISIS continues to be successful. I'm talking about Saudi Arabia, Iran, Turkey. Right now, the only guys really doing anything seriously there are the French and the Americans. And not very much, too.
What about the Kurds? What about the Kurds?
Well, the Kurds are working really hard. There are two problems with the Kurds. The first is that there are not a whole lot of them. I mean, they're really, really good, but there are not a whole lot of them. And second, and maybe more important, is that the Kurds do not want to take over Syria. They just want to be left alone. They want to get people off their backs and live in peace. And what success there really requires is a large number of troops on the ground seizing and holding terrain from ISIS and then staying there long enough so that local institutions can be built up, start collecting the trash and all the rest of that stuff. Mm-hmm. And that takes a lot of people. The Kurds are not prepared to do that. They don't want to do it. They don't want to be in charge of Syria, which is not Kurdish. I mean, only a small portion of it is. So to a greater or lesser extent, the Kurds are just defending themselves, really. Mm-hmm. And So that we can't seem to muster any interest among the people who really ought to be doing something there to do something there.
It's like they're waiting for the United States, and they're appreciative that the French are now engaged. I mean, the French are in it now. There's no question about that. This is their 9/11. Now, whether it's going to motivate other countries, but the issue of NATO comes up, and there is a membership clause in NATO that if the French take action at NATO, that it would force all 28 nations to make a statement of position on where they are on this, if I have that correctly.
Yeah, that is correct.
Okay, so is that coming? Is that important? Is that necessary? Your thoughts?
It is important, it is necessary, it is coming, but as I guess the architect Mies van der Rohe once said, the devil is in the details. So we've seen a wide variety of assertions of under the auspices of NATO since the formation of NATO, and they have run the gamut from full-blown participation on the one hand to much more frequently. That's really good. It's really bad news that this has happened, and our hearts and minds are with you, and that's about it. So you know, at the end of it's like they say in the litigation business, you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate. And what needs to happen now is that the State Department needs to be negotiating very, very heavily with our allies and push the limits of involvement of other people. The United States is not going to do this stuff alone. We've been doing it for a long time and don't have a lot to show for it, honestly.
You know, a picture tells 1,000 words. President Obama huddled with one interpreter with Vladimir Putin at the G20. The journalistic question is, what did you talk about? What do you think? What do you think they talked about, and how close are the Russians going to be to the United States and vice versa when it comes to dealing with ISIS?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. Well, I can tell you they weren't talking about the price of oil, which the Russians are very concerned about. But having said that, that's not what they were talking about. But you raise a very interesting point. So we're on the opposite side of the Russians and the Iranians in Syria. We're on the other side. They want to hold on to Assad. We want to dump them. I mean, that's been our major focus.
Yeah, it has.
Now, all of a sudden, our objective doesn't seem to be to get rid of Assad, or probably shouldn't be. Our common objective needs to be to get rid of ISIS. Now, with the downing of the Russian airliner.
And now that the Russians have said it is terrorism, that's the story this morning.
And today they said it's terrorism, which everybody knew, but they confirmed it through they found explosive residue on the fuselage. The Russians are now very highly motivated to, instead of just bombing the opponents of Assad, to now get serious about getting rid of ISIS. There is with a common enemy, there is a possibility that you might see the United States and Russia and maybe even Iran coalescing into an organization that can really get something done. And this means that a couple of things, some are good and some are a little distasteful. One of them is that good stuff, we might start sharing some intelligence information. And it's intelligence that's going to defeat these guys, not just bombs. It's going to take intelligence. The second thing is, and this makes it extremely difficult for the president and the United States generally, it might very well be that we'll have to make a deal with Russia and Iran that we're going to shut up about getting rid of Assad right now. He knows he's going. I think the Russians have already told him he's going, but not until things get stabilized inside the country. Yeah. And I think we're going to have to sign on to that. That means the president's got something of a public relations problem. But I hark back, and I don't want to talk about this too much because it takes a lot of time, but there's plenty of precedent for this. We defeated the Nazis in the Second World War, being allied with Stalin, and Stalin killed more Russians than the Nazis did. I mean, talk about a bloodthirsty despot. He was it, but he, as much as anybody else, contributed to the defeat of the Axis, and we were on his side. We might want to think about that again. Interesting point.
You know, everybody talks about how tough Putin is. You now have a Russian civilian airliner downed. If that had happened on Nikita Khrushchev's watch, somebody had been nuked by now.
I think you're absolutely.
All this talk about Putin being so tough, wait a minute. He's not as tough as the last guy from decades ago during the Cold War.
No, Khrushchev's finger was always on the trigger.
No doubt. Colonel Jack Jacobs, always. Great to have you with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Ed.
You bet. When we come back, the question, do we bring in Syrian refugees? That's next. Stay with us.
From the steel mills of Pennsylvania to the auto factories of Michigan to the modern makers movement, manufacturing makes our nation great. I'm Scott Paul, president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing. We bring business and labor together to advocate for policies that everyone can agree on. Together, we can strengthen manufacturing and create good-paying American jobs. Help us keep it made in America.
The Ed Schultz Internet broadcast is brought to you by the Ring of Fire radio show. Listen to the Ring of Fire weekends on radio stations across the country. Get more information and the news of the day at ringofireradio.com.
Communication Workers of America, Alliance for American Manufacturing, BioGreen Clean, and the iSafe team bring you this production. We're here Monday through Friday. Thanks for the view at We Got Ed, ringofireradio.com, and also rawstory.com. President Obama is clearly a moral man, and he is following, I think, the mindset of other leaders, such as Merkel from Germany, that we have a moral obligation, that we don't turn our back on women and children who have been victimized by terrorists. Here's what he had to say at the G20.
And when I hear folks say that, well, maybe we should just admit the Christians but not the Muslims. When I hear political leaders suggesting that there would be a religious test for which person who's fleeing from a war-torn country is admitted, when some of those folks themselves come from families who benefited from protection when they were fleeing political persecution, that's shameful. That's not American. It's not who we are.
Respond to that, Marco Rubio. He's talking about you and your family coming from Cuba. So, I mean, human beings are human beings, no matter what decade it comes from or no matter what generation it comes from. I understand the security issue. Joe Sestak told us yesterday on this production that there's no doubt the United States has the tools to make sure that we make the right decisions as to who we let into the country. And we have a moral obligation. I lean in that direction. But the security is going to have to be extremely tight, and the vetting process is going to have to be tight. Now, this idea of allowing just Christians into the country was brought up by Bush and also Rubio. But here comes Ted Cruz threatening legislation.
What Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton are proposing is that we bring to this country tens of thousands of Syrian Muslim refugees. I have to say, particularly in light of what happened in Paris, that's nothing short of lunacy.
Might be lunacy in his world, but he's going to give us some lunacy legislation. That's what he is going to introduce. How far will it go? Let's turn to Congresswoman Lois Frankel, who is a Democrat from Florida. She is a member of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs. Congresswoman, good to have you with us.
Good morning. Good to be with you, Ed.
You bet. Do we bring in 10,000 Syrian refugees? Is this going to be a big debate in Congress?
Well, you asked me two questions there. The first is, my own opinion is, we face this refugee crisis both with an open heart and a discerning mind. Obviously, the security of our people are very important, but we have to be a beacon of hope for those who are suffering around the world. So, and I believe we can do both. However, I will tell you this, many of my colleagues do not. And we expect there may even be a fight in terms of passing a budget, because there are going to be some who will try to propose some measures that would prevent the president from bringing in any Syrian refugees.
I mean, this is new territory for the United States. This is banning Muslim Syrian refugees coming to this country, as the president talked about, a religious test. You say that you're with the president on this, that we have a moral obligation to do this. But I think gauging just how big a fight this is going to be in Congress is where the American people are what they're trying to judge right now. You think there'll be a budget fight over this?
Well, there has been talk about that, and a number of the Republican, I think all the Republican presidential candidates have called on our new Speaker, Ryan, to, not to pass a budget that does not include this type of prohibition.
What do you think of all the governors now who are stepping out saying that these Syrian refugees will not be allowed in their state? I guess my first question on that is, do they have jurisdiction over the federal to do that?
Well, let me just start with probably the obvious, which is, we have to take every precaution to ensure that criminals and potential terrorists do not penetrate our borders, and are coming in with fake passports or anything like we saw that may have happened in France. But what our public needs to know is that refugees are subject to the strictest entry procedures of any type traveler to the United States. The admission process is very different from other countries and contains requirements that cannot be waived. Before any refugee can resettle in the United States, they must undergo a mandatory in-person interview, extensive security check, and a medical check. And this admission process sometimes takes 18 to 24 months. A lot of these refugees have just been in refugee camps waiting to be processed. And what the public also needs to know is that our admission program prioritizes the most vulnerable refugees, especially women and children. So there is a lot of scrutiny going on, and what the public should know is those of us who do support what I would say is a moral, humane policy, we understand why people are frightened, and we also understand that the security of people here have to come first. With that said, opening our doors to the refugees not only is a moral imperative, but the failure to have a reasonable, humane, constitutional policy will create a backlash that we will feel for years to come, because there'll be a whole new group of young people growing up who were subject to horrific attacks in Syria. They will become very alienated, and they will be very susceptible to the call of ISIS.
Well, that is the one thing that the conservatives seem to be throwing out there, such as Ted Cruz, Rubio, and Bush. How do you examine someone's heart? You can have the most thorough process in the world, whether it be 18 or 24 months, but how do you know that they're not a radical? How do you know that they're not jaded and a member of ISIS? That is a tall order, and that's what they fear. And, of course, they're trying to get political gain by playing the fear card. I mean, we've seen this before. It's really a situation we've never seen before. And it's going to play into the next presidency. How big is this going to be, you think, in the 2016 election cycle?
It's very difficult. I mean, if the election was next month, I would say it would be huge. And it still may be. I shouldn't use the word huge. I think one of the political candidates uses that word. But, it could be significant. It may be significant. Right now I think people are quite fearful and very emotional about what happened in Paris, and if they're following, what happened in other, with the Russian aircraft that exploded, a lot of bad things happening. So, but politics is a very interesting game. You don't know month to month what the next crisis will be.
Lois Frankel, Congresswoman from Florida. Good to have you with us on Ed Schultz News and Commentary. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ed.
Thanks so much. You know, watching the conservative media, you get the sense, all right, let's put the Muslims over here, let's have the Christians over here, and let's just freaking have at it and have a religious war. That's how it's coming off. That's not doing America any favors. Communication Workers of America, Alliance for American Manufacturing, BioGreen Clean, and the iSave team bring you this production. We're back tomorrow.